Welcome on in. This is the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast for Thursday, September 1st. We are going to be diving into roster cutdowns, some winners, some losers, some impactful signings for fantasy from across the league. We're also going to get into a little bit of a best ball review going into the Fantasy Football Pentathlon. A lot of interesting stuff there, a lot of industry minds. So we will be breaking that all down here on this episode of the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Welcome on in. This is the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, John McKechnie, joined as always by Mario Puig. This podcast presented to you by our friends over at Dynasty Owner. Mario, how are you doing on this Thursday as we finally turn the calendar to September?
Well, it feels kind of like a relief with the season getting close, of course, because we can finally turn off some of the engines in this take machine that we are all trapped in. But of course, it'll keep going. But any depletion of it is welcomed. But I also know from memory that life does not get any easier when the season starts. My relief will turn to terror almost immediately. So yeah, it's quite a slog. A fourth of the year or more, putting your head down like this. But yeah, gotta get through it eventually. So might as well dive into the thresher now.
Yep, here we are, and I'm staring right into the abyss right now with college football getting started
Oh my God.
fully. I think there's like 20 games on this Thursday night slate, which is a heavy lift.
John, can
For a
you get
Thursday.
the Tennessee Chattanooga guy projection input, please? Can you
Okay,
pull over and do that?
I'm having an anxiety attack on the pod. For this is a RotoWire first, I think. Also, might be sounding a little better now this week, hopefully. So boosting up the sound quality, boosting up the production. Got a fancy new microphone here, so we're taking that guy out for a spin. But beyond that, why don't we go ahead, dive into the latest from around the league? Why don't we start things out in Los Angeles? So Sony Michelle, noted veteran, gets cut from the Dolphins, kind of clearing the deck slightly in Miami. But I mean, that's still a backfield that's hard to make heads and tails of. We can get to that in a little bit. But Sony Michelle inks up a deal with the Chargers. I think Isaiah Spiller, I know for me, I have like a 10th round share of him in the RotoWire Online Championship. So how anxious should I be about that one?
About as anxious as me, I guess. I'm pretty substantially invested in Spiller too, and it's crazy. Just like 5 days ago, I was looking at my Isaiah Spiller and Ronald Jones shares, and I was thinking like, yeah, even I'm getting nervous about Ronald Jones, but at least Spiller I'm not worried about, because with Spiller the panic was about like, oh, Josh Kelly's ahead of him on the depth chart. It's like whatever. If that's the kind of depth chart they're willing to tear up, 5 plays into a game. If so, I don't care about Josh Kelly. Sony Michelle, I do care about. It sucks as a Spiller investor because I never thought Spiller was that good. I just thought he was better than Kelly, which he definitely is. But Spiller is not that good, and Michelle not being that good doesn't mean Spiller has any sort of traction in this situation. I mean, he missed enough practice with that ankle issue that Sony Michelle can probably get caught up to where he is pretty quickly, especially being a veteran who's been around a few different teams, and he kind of knows what it's like to get parachuted into a roster and have to play pretty quickly. So I have pretty much abandoned all hope for Spiller because I don't think he's good enough to win on merit if Michelle is there. And I say that as someone who doesn't even think Michelle is particularly good.
So what is like the overall theory when it comes to targeting these Chargers, secondary running backs, but behind Austin Eckler? Is it an injury hedge, or is it like an expectation more so that they're going to take some of the between the tackles work off of Eckler's plate, that type of thing? I mean, what kind of drew you towards Spiller in the first place, or and now zooming out, just kind of like this number 2 role in the Chargers backfield?
Well, part of it was definitely as simple as, this Chargers offense is going to score points. So if someone's playing snaps in it, I barely even care who they are. So Spiller being a running back, that's particularly true. I mean, I think it's nonsense and basically Pinkerton propaganda that people say running backs don't matter. But there are some cases where they matter less, and there are some situations where the replacement level is pretty uh, high. Is that what it is when you can go get anybody and plug them in? Because Sony Michelle
Yes.
is basically a nobody running back, and if he's in a Herbert offense, especially with guys like Keenan Allen and Mike Williams drawing so much attention, he's playing on easy mode there. Just like guys like Damian Williams and Spencer Ware with the Chiefs putting up huge numbers. It's kind of something like that. And now the problem is we don't know if he's going to get those snaps. Spiller's case. So in Michelle's case, if he gets the snaps, then the rule applies to him instead. It's just if you're getting 400 snaps in the Chargers offense and you're a running back, you are useful in fantasy almost no matter how bad you are. So yeah, I think. Specifically though, the way it would have worked in my mind was they want to get Eckler down to more like 10 carries per game than 12 or 15. And that initial slack alone would have gone pretty much entirely to Spiller. Now pretty much entirely to Michelle. And then the upside angle, of course, is well, what if Eckler misses some time? Because if Eckler is not able to play at some point, it's not like they have some other guy to just put in for the Eckler function. The Eckler position is gone at that point. They have to replace it with just whatever's laying around, which is to say, guys who can take some of those touches, most or all of those touches, but a lot more of them are going to have to be carries. And that suits Michelle just fine. I mean, you'd take targets too for Spiller and Michelle. That'd be great. But as runners is where they have to make their living, and it again should basically be easy mode in this offense. I mean, I think Justin Jackson is a surprisingly competent threat from scrimmage. His issue has more to do with volume limitations, but he's still probably no better than average even from scrimmage. And we saw you plug him in, and even he is so much better than Larry Roundtree and Josh Kelly that he put up big numbers whenever they gave him the ball.
No, absolutely. So that there's value within this role. Do you have any Sony Michelle yet? And where are you willing to
It
jump in?
wasn't much. I mean, I had him in that article. There was a best ball one from oh God, it's probably already been a couple months, but he was in the list of the 18th round guys to pick, and it was him and guys who aren't that exciting, but it was basically hey, the Dolphins have to give somebody carries. So the reason that I had in mind never even ended up applying, but the result actually is even more favorable. I think. I as a Sony Michelle investor, I'd much rather see him with the Chargers than the Dolphins, and I understand he can get more realistically a higher off the bat share with the Dolphins, but I don't think it's that much more than what he's looking at off the bench with the Chargers, and B, the scaling up scenario, the upside scenario doesn't exist with the Dolphins. They will always be in some kind of committee no matter who gets hurt. Whereas with the Chargers, if Eckler misses time, God forbid, it's they don't have much choice but to just give the next guy, 15 carries and 3 catches.
Yeah. So this bodes ill for Spiller, and it suddenly makes Sony Michelle an interesting late round target to be sure.
He is injury prone, I guess, is the one thing we
Yes.
can keep in. It's especially if you're in an NFFC kind of thing, it's worth holding on to Spiller, because if Michelle tweaks his knee, it's all right, we're back to square one. Spiller's right back where he was, where we thought he was. But yeah, if Michelle is upright, I don't know.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you on that read. Julia, MVP listener and viewer of ours, wants to know. So let's go ahead, transition over to Miami, where Sony Michelle just got cut from, of course. Do you bump up Chase Edmonds at all as a result of this, or are there some other running backs in Miami that you think might have some additional value as a result of this? I'm trying to, I think, target some Raheem Mostert. Obviously nothing more than an RB5 type of deal, but the
He
at
can
least in
run.
best ball, the speed variable that he brings to the table, I think, is interesting enough to maybe he ends up contributing to your team a couple times this season before invariably he gets dinged up, because that seems to just kind of always be able to be the deal with him, unfortunately. But your thoughts on this Miami backfield now that Michelle is subtracted from it?
So I don't actually think it's a reason to raise Edmonds. I think Edmonds was going to work at whatever level he was going to anyway, and I think he's got that same cap. He can't take on much more. They can't give him the Michelle carries, but that's fine because he should be so busy as a pass catcher that I thought he was underpriced to start with in PPR, maybe half point PPR too. He could catch like 70 passes in this offense. Like we know Waddle and Hill are both headed for 100 or so catches, but the other players like Gesicki, Cedric Wilson, they're just kind of like rotational, situational slot targets or something like that. And obviously Waddle and Hill will both play in the slot much too. So I can imagine Gesicki, Wilson, whatever other pass catcher is doing surprisingly little. And yet with Tua probably not being a good quarterback, he's not going to strike downfield as much as someone obviously like Mahomes would have. So he's going to have a lot of the same Mahomes looks, the too high looks because of Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle being so dangerous. But he's not going to be able to force the ball downfield. So I imagine kind of a scenario like last year with the Chiefs, where you see Darrell Williams in the regular season, and then in the playoffs, Jerick McKinnon catching all these flats passes where there's just no defense for 25 yards. Well, that happens because the defense is worried about those downfield receivers. And Edmonds, unlike Darrell Williams, unlike Jerick McKinnon, is actually a threat from scrimmage and is a legitimately good pass catching target. So I think Edmonds could catch like 70 passes, and if his price goes up, I think it could still be worth taking him. I just don't think there was ever any reason to make that readjustment on the basis of Michelle. I thought the path was always there for Edmonds. But yeah,
Okay.
the other running backs that kept, I hate everything. This is like the exact opposite of what I would have done. Keeping Gaskin and Salvon Ahmed, even if you're keeping one of those two, the other is completely redundant to the first, and there's no reason to keep either of them. So I agree with you on Mostert, though. That guy can definitely run. I don't know how much he can take without getting hurt, but if he's upright, he can run.
No, he absolutely can. And again, you're looking at an offense that, should be playing to favorable run scripts with guys like Hill and Waddle out there threatening defenses deep. Obviously not going to be running against a ton of loaded boxes. At least we don't expect that to be the case. So, that there's some intrigue there for Edmonds, obviously at ADP, and then Mostert, I think as well is pretty interesting. Sticking in backfields, what did you make of Kansas City holding on to everybody? And do you think that they make a move before the season starts?
I don't know. I would have thought if there was a trade opportunity to move Ronald Jones, it would have been the Ravens, because otherwise I don't really see. They wouldn't want to give him to the Chargers because then he's their problem. I think, might have given it to the Ravens, but if they're signing Kenyon Drake, I don't think the Ravens have any urgency to cough up whatever it would take to get Jones. And I cannot claim to have any idea what the Chiefs are thinking, but personally, I think that they are not seeing the picture right if they ever wanted or considered moving on from Jones. I know he's limited as a pass catcher. I know he's not reliable in blitz pickup, but Ronald Jones can run. And this Chiefs team needs to run more and run better than they have in years. Like they can't. Or last year they couldn't even get Damian Williams, Spencer Ware level returns, even though we already know those guys are capable of it. And it's because Darrell Williams and Jerick McKinnon are so bad. And McKinnon, I don't know why it's so hard for people to remember 3 games back, but because of him playing the 2 playoff games when Clyde Edwards-Helaire had the busted shoulder and basically was not out there, people think Jerick McKinnon is good now, and he isn't. Even last year in the regular season, he was useless in the regular season. He averaged like 1.05 yards per snap or something like that. That is unacceptable. Darrell Williams was unacceptable too. He was like 1.78 or something, 1.8 maybe yards per snap. Guys like Jonathan Taylor average like 2.7 yards per snap from scrimmage. And you got to get that over 2 at the running back position. You cannot have your running backs logging reps, logging upwards of 1,000 reps a year and getting you less than 1.7 yards per snap. Like, you're going to have way too much slack. You're forcing Pat Mahomes to throw for like 5,700 yards, or you're going to have cold stretches as an offense. You're going to have the dysfunction that they had last year. So the cause of their dysfunction was defenses responding to their downfield passing game by just forfeiting the underneath and giving them too high every single play. And Pat Mahomes sometimes had the restraint to take advantage of that, to take those wide open Darrell Williams targets. That Raiders game especially was just comical. Just no defense. They said, we won't cover him. We won't cover him. And Mahomes still had some plays where he'd go back and he'd be like, I don't want to take the easy 8. I got to get this guy open deep. I can almost see it. And it never was there because there was always 2 safeties not playing honest defense. They were just sitting back against the pass. So if you want to hurt a defense for doing that, you better be able to run. And they couldn't last year. Darrell Williams is a fullback. Jerick McKinnon is a mascot. They couldn't move the ball. So if Clyde Edwards-Helaire can't be that guy, then they need to find someone who can be. And it makes a lot of sense to me to sign Marquez Valdes-Scantling to be a big slot for the reasons I've talked about before. It's like you keep the safety from playing too close. If they want to, if you trade Tyreek Hill and the defenses respond by quitting the too high, and now you're in a position where you can't burn them for it, then adding Marquez Valdes-Scantling makes a lot of sense because the safety still plays the too high look. You still keep them playing far back, and you can still have this advantageous run setup. Ronald Jones can capitalize on that look. Where Darrell Williams gets 4 yards, Ronald Jones can take it, the whole distance basically. And so you got Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who I still think is good, but it never made any sense at all to make him like a 20 carry, 2-catch running back. Like, what the hell are you thinking? That's exactly the opposite of what makes sense. He caught like 58 passes, 60 passes last year at LSU. Give him those McKinnon passing down snaps. Make Clyde Edwards-Helaire useful by giving him fewer carries and give him those passing down snaps that McKinnon completely wasted. And then you can give those running play snaps to guys like Pacheco and Jones, who can probably, in my opinion, be as good as guys like Spencer Ware and Damian Williams. So I'm not like saying all wheels up for Ronald Jones because I happen to think Pacheco is pretty good, but Clyde Edwards-Helaire has shown the ability to break down after 12 or so carries per game. They need more than that. So if they don't think Pacheco can give them 12 to 15 carries per game reliably, then they need Jones to step up. And if Clyde Edwards-Helaire gets hurt, which he has both of the past 2 years, then they just need Ronald Jones anyway. So I think Jones is worth holding on to. Pacheco's preferable, but I think the Chiefs would be foolish to move him because I think they really might need him, especially in the second half of this year.
Okay, so just kind of standing pat as far as your exposure to this backfield goes. So no real movement, if anything, maybe some downward trajectory, just given how crowded it is.
To me, it's as simple as like Clyde Edwards-Helaire is kind of in that like 8th round range, Pacheco in that like 10 to 12. I'll take Ronald Jones anywhere from like the 15th onward now but you don't need to. I got him in like the 18th a couple times. I'll still take that because I mean, even if they did cut him, I mean, 18th round running backs you're taking in best ball and things like that. Like there are guys who are not even going to be in the CFL in 2 years. And Ronald Jones, even if he gets cut, like he'll he can be that stupid Le'Veon Bell, Devontae Freeman scenario with the Ravens last year, So I think all of Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Pacheco, and Ronald Jones are worth taking at cost. Although, admittedly, it's a lot easier to get Pacheco or Jones since they're 3-4 rounds cheaper.
Right. No, exactly.
McKinnon is the one I don't care about. I don't think people are thinking that one through at all. Like he played in the regular season, he did nothing until Clyde Edwards-Helaire got hurt.
But those playoff games. So yeah, a tricky backfield that I thought would get a little bit thinned out by this time, but obviously it did not end up being the case. Before we get on to our next backfield, got a message from our friends over at Dynasty Owner. Do you love fantasy sports? Are you ready for a new challenge this year? Dynasty Owner is the new way to play fantasy football with real NFL salaries, adding the strategy of running an actual franchise. Dynasty Owner provides a unique and challenging experience that will test your skills as an owner and general manager. You will have complete control over your team's future. You can build through the draft, make trades, sign free agents, and manage your team's salary cap. Can you create a dynasty of champions? Sign up now at dynastyowner.com and use promo code ROTO5, that's ROTO5, to receive $5 off any new team. We also got a message from our friends over at Blue Wire. All right, we just touched on them briefly just a minute ago, but let's unpack it a little bit further as it pertains to the Baltimore Ravens. J.K. Dobbins just not sounding awesome as far as his week 1 availability, let alone him being up to full strength. There's a lot of Twitter doctors out there, to be clear, that are analyzing his tape from these various drills and being like, oh, he doesn't look good, but I still am queasy at the idea of Dobbins being right week 1, September, maybe even all season. So feeling bad about that one. However, they do go ahead and bring in Kenyon Drake, who was released by the Raiders, I believe, since we last talked. So what kind of function can Drake bring to the table here as far as this Ravens offense is concerned? And were you also surprised a little bit that they were ready to part ways with 2022 draft pick Tyler Beatty already?
I guess I was the tiniest bit surprised about Beatty just because I kind of forgot about Justice Hill, but
Same.
it makes Justice Hill is definitely a way better prospect than Beatty was, even though Beatty's got some stuff going for him, and even though Hill has had a star-crossed career to this point. Hill can maybe help them though. I mean, if that Achilles is fine, he did start over Chris Carson as a true freshman at Oklahoma State, and I think we could say Oklahoma State should have started Carson and still acknowledge that that's pretty impressive on Hill's part. So Hill over Beatty makes sense, and especially since they did get him to the practice squad, I think. So they were kind of, if that was part of their calculation, then they were correct, and they can bring back Beatty if they want to, hopefully. But yeah, Drake and Mike Davis is the tough part because and also Dobbins is also the tough part too. But I don't know. I feel like we don't have enough reliable information on Dobbins to be presuming anything in particular, and I really do mean that both ways. And I think with Gus Edwards being out for the first month at least, the Ravens, especially after last year, are going to be very sensitive to the question of their running back depth. They know they need to run. They saw what happens last year if they can't. It's like you got guys like Devontae Freeman, Tyson Williams, Le'Veon Bell at those stages of their careers anyway. If you're depending on them, you're just in trouble. So they want to go into it with more depth than that. They want to be prepared. They want to have the luxury of giving Dobbins fewer snaps in a game, I think, if they get the opportunity. But what I can't see is them functioning as an offense without Dobbins. I think I don't know. If you made me guess, I would sooner say Dobbins does play in week 1, but just doesn't play more than like 25 snaps or something like that. And then if they play 65, 70 snaps, they will want to have had Kenyon Drake and Mike Davis available to pick up, upwards of 20 carries between themselves, not each, but between the two. So I think they're trying to kind of like, and they are going with an ongoing evaluation too. It's like just because they're bringing in Drake doesn't mean they're going to build the offense around him too. It's like we saw last year, they were bringing guys in and shuffling them out unceremoniously. We may or may not see them give Drake a significant workload. But I will say, I do think Drake has some running ability. I think he's one of these guys with incomplete skill sets, and he's kind of goofy. Like he's not good enough as a runner to justify how bad he is as a passing down guy. But in the Ravens scheme, I mean, we did just see washed up Devontae Freeman put up totally good numbers. And not to take the credit away from Freeman, he did a good job or whatever, considering what he had left. But Drake should be able to put up some numbers if they're giving him like 15 carries in a game. The problem is I don't know if they're going to do that or if they're going to give 8 to him, 8 to Davis, 8 to Hill, something like that. But yeah, I Dobbins wise, I actually am getting curious to get my first shares of the year. Like I hadn't taken him before, not because I was worried about his health. It was actually like I was wrong. I was right for the wrong reasons. Like I thought Gus Edwards was going to be back, and I still think he'll be back. I think the Ravens are in trouble if they can't get Edwards in October. But it wasn't that I was like, oh, I think Dobbins is going to miss time, or like, oh, I think Dobbins isn't good enough. It's like I think Dobbins is a star waiting to happen. And if he goes falling into like the 7th or 8th rounds over this, I think it's a good time to get him for anyone who still has drafts left.
Yeah, he went in the late 5th of a 12-teamer in the pentathlon best ball. That's PPR. So I mean,
I guess I need him a little later than that, but I bet it's going to happen, especially if the tone sets in that just like, oh, because this is how things work on Twitter now, and some sites. It's just a thing that becomes a suggestion or a fear becomes a fact very quickly when enough people repeat it.
And I think there's also something to be said for maybe people overweighting week 1 as like this game that means that counts more than the rest of the games. So like if Dobbins is limited in week 1, but he's like ready to rock by week 2, week 3, then you end up getting a pretty nice value potentially if he ends up sliding into the 6th or 7th round. But again, we will see. But the idea of him being limited for week 1, I think, creates like potentially an outsized bit of panic. I don't know.
They got to run a lot, and they know from last year that you can lose the things that you need to run effectively in a span of 2 days. So they're preparing depth, and I don't think, especially if someone's reasoning that Dobbins must be in trouble because they kept Hill and Davis and pursued Drake, that would not be. You need like inside info. You need to talk to Dobbins' trainer or whatever. And I haven't heard from him, and I haven't seen anybody quoting him.
No, nor have I. So, TBD on that one. And then do you think Drake can also kind of take on some of the pass catching work? Because, again, we talked about how bleak that pass catching group looks as a whole.
That's why it was so funny, aside from just how bad the money was, it was so funny that John Gruden signed Drake to be a pass catching specialist. Like, that's not his thing. He's closer to that Ronald Jones category of like, he can run, not as well as Jones, by the way. But he can run, but he can't like follow instructions or like be on a script, and like, he can't do passing down stuff. He's never been a good pass catcher. And they were like, okay, we're gonna have you earn your $9 million per year as like the 7th highest paid running back. We're gonna make you earn your keep on passing downs, the thing you are worst at. Anyway, I think if they have passing functions for the running backs in that offense, not just Hill but Davis is ahead of Drake.
Okay, all right, that's good to know. I think some people might kind of make that presupposition that Drake can pick up some of that pass catching work, but we say nay.
Sucks at it. Yeah.
No bueno. So before we get on over to our next item, we're going to hit some Cardinals here in a moment, but got a couple messages starting things off with our friends over at Hoffer. Daily fantasy football fans, your dreams are about to come true. Tired of the same old player drafts and salary caps? Sick of losing to the Sharks and their little spreadsheets? Fed up with always playing against the house? Well, the solution is here. Hoffer Daily Fantasy Sports. That's HOFR for Hoffer. On Hoffer, contests are always on your terms. Only fans create the contests and write the questions on Hoffer. Not only that, but they set the terms too, including the entry fee, number of players, prize, and more. With over 12 different simple multiple choice gameplays, every fan can play and win their own way. So let your sports imagination run wild and rake in some serious dough in the process. Play for as low as $1 and bank up to a $50 bonus with your first deposit. Plus, earn $10 with every friend you refer. Make your name known in the fantasy sports world on the largest growing peer-to-peer sports marketplace. Download Hoffer. Again, that's HOFR. It's the most versatile way to play. And then we got a message from our friends over at Fantrax. Is there something you wish your fantasy leagues had or features that are missing from your current leagues? Bonus scoring, custom schedules or playoffs, deeper team settings? Well, look no further because we have you covered with our friends at Fantrax. Fantrax is the most customizable fantasy platform in the industry, offering the greatest fantasy experience for your dynasty, keeper, redraft, and best ball leagues. Join MLB All-Star Jock Peterson, who recently announced he's moving his fantasy leagues to Fantrax. And Fantrax is excited to announce the Fantrax Game Day Experience giveaway. Fantrax will be sending one lucky fantasy football league to a regular season NFL game of their choice, along with $6,000 towards travel and accommodations. All you have to do is enter the giveaway and create a join a league on Fantrax. The more leagues you create and join, the more chances you have to win. There's a reason why fantasy players who try Fantrax make it the permanent home for all their fantasy leagues. Go to fantrax.com/RotoWire and sign up today. All right, Mario, onward. So some news and notes came out of Arizona. I believe it was Wednesday. Looked like a handful of their players are dealing with some unspecified injuries. I guess not necessarily in the case of Zach Ertz, but Rondale Moore looks like to be a bit of a question mark heading into week 1. Zach Ertz, I think, might be a close call as well. So your thoughts on those guys and the rest of Arizona, as you know, they're already going to be a little bit shorthanded early in the season with obviously DeAndre Hopkins being suspended for the first 6 weeks of the season. Can they afford to have guys like Ertz and Moore sidelined?
I guess not. I mean, we'll see. They do have some tight end depth, more than they probably should, given the contract that they gave Ertz this offseason. But they got Trey McBride. I happen to think Max Williams can play a little bit, and he's still hanging around. So I think if they can run, they'll be fine. And they do get some good run setups because when you run that four wide stuff, it's not like the defense is going to respond with a 4-3 alignment. They're going to put out, corners. They're going to put four corners on the field, and those guys, especially that fourth corner, might be south of 190. So, granted, Marquise Brown is not blocking anybody, but
Correct.
if they get, if they go four wide, they get quirky little setups like Antoine Wesley matched up against a 5'10" guy and stuff like that. That when you run it, and if you got a good runner like James Conner, and if the defense is playing with wide splits in the front four because of the Kyler Murray bootleg threat, then they can run the ball pretty well. And if McBride can step up, that'd be great. Max Williams, of course. So, granted, or with that said, we'll have to see what these guys are actually dealing with because Cliff Kingsbury saying they're questionable for week one right now. At least in the absence of some sort of like week to week prognosis. If Rondale Moore had a high ankle sprain and they were like he's questionable for week one, I'd be like, oh yeah, he sure is. But when I'm just relying on Cliff Kingsbury's takes, when he doesn't even really seem to be thinking much about the answers, I don't know. I'm not planning on anything in particular as it relates to Moore or Ertz at this point. I guess I'm sooner assuming they'll be out there. But yeah, if Ertz is out, and if especially if Rondale's out too, Marquise Brown might have to get like 14 targets in week one if that happens.
Do you think AJ Green might be a little bit interesting for DFS that week?
Yeah, I mean he's not himself, but he's better than some other players who are going to play wide receiver snaps this year. So especially with Hopkins out, especially if you put Marquise Brown and AJ Green on the same side of the defense, the safety's only running with Brown, and not that they would have bracketed AJ Green if not, but sometimes you'd have a safety drifting over to his side just because there's too high kind of thing, and maybe maybe Green's the only guy on his side of the field, and so he probably sees a little. You can set up some scenarios where he gets freed up is the thing, and they might concurrently have the need to do that. Like they might need to set up some AJ Green looks because maybe they are doubling Brown effectively. Maybe they are just sitting too high and they're not giving him anything deep, and they need to start moving the chains, keeping the ball from the other team for a while. AJ Green can make those sideline one-on-one catches, and since he goes in the last round of best ball drafts, I've taken him quite a few times. That may or may not be because I've also taken DeAndre Hopkins lots of times, and I'm kind of reasoning like, oh, he'll hopefully bridge me over those first 6 weeks a little tiny bit. But yeah, AJ Green can at once be toast, and probably is, and still a relative fantasy value, especially in best ball, since you don't need to have the belligerent courage to put him in your starting lineup there.
Yeah, no, exactly. So I've gotten a decent amount of best ball exposure for AJ Green as well under those same premises. Just assuming with Hopkins being out, um, he's a guy that's unique relative to guys like Rondale Moore and Marquise Brown, who are smaller in stature, do different things on the field. AJ Green, I think, can still, like you alluded to, still win on the outside a little bit, still win those one-on-one battles on the sideline. So vague interest again. He's a guy that you scoop late. Maybe the last receiver, second to last receiver that you end up taking in an 18 or 20 team or 20 round type of league. Yes. Speaking of, let's transition on over to best ball. So I am participating once again in Derek Van Riper's Fantasy Football Pentathlon. As you can imagine, it is a 5-legged event that measures the true mettle of a fantasy football player. So there is a best ball leg of it that we're going to get into here. There's a super flex auction where you also start 2 tight ends. We are not going to get into that one because that was a tricky one that I had to navigate last night. And then there's also a DFS component. There's a spread picks component and a survivor component as well. But this is a great one. We're drafting on best ball 10. So again, that's full point PPR. I had some anxiety going into this one just because I didn't know what the draft order was going to be. There was no KDS or anything like that. And, just kind of by luck of the draw a lot this draft season. I've had a lot of picks in the top 5. So my strategy has kind of been baked into my head that way, because I've run through that scenario so many different times. But I was definitely concerned about what I was going to do if I drew like the 6th pick or later. So I was able to get the 2nd pick. I went ahead and locked in Jonathan Taylor. But before we kind of get into my team a little bit more, how have you been approaching your draft slots if you're picking outside the top 5 when it comes to your first round targets?
Well, let's see. I basically would take either a running back or receiver, and the running backs, let's see, usually Henry and Eckler go by like 5, 6, 7, something like that. So if we're counting late first as like 8 or later, then realistically there are 2 running backs that I'm considering. There is a third, and others, even the other guys that go a little later, but it's Dalvin Cook and Joe Mixon that stand out to me at running back, because I just think Dalvin is clearly like a top 5 running back, and all the other guys who are within a whiff of like top 5 consideration at running back tend to go earlier than him. I don't even really know the basis for him going behind a guy like Eckler in the first place, and I love Eckler, but I just don't really. And I'm also paranoid about Dalvin Cook's shoulder and probably
Sure.
everything else, but I just the logic that says, take Christian McCaffrey first overall, because if he doesn't get hurt, he's going to be the first player. If we apply that to Dalvin Cook, then he should probably be going like 4th or something, behind Jonathan Taylor, basically, wherever that is. So I like Dalvin Cook, risky as he is. I think Alexander Madison is he's cheaper this year by quite a bit. I feel like he's like 2 or 3 rounds cheaper than he was the last couple years. So you can get Madison cheap enough that it's almost worth taking him as a handcuff on a Cook squad, because it's like handcuffing is not great, I guess, but if the alternative is between like from Alexander Madison and the 12th, if the alternative is just like Tyler Algier or something, like, then just take Madison, even if it's technically a handcuff. But so that's affordable and appealing to me. Mixon, not nearly as talented as Cook, but in a better offense, maybe a lot better offense. And so if he's getting 20 carries and 3 catches and the Bengals offense, I barely care what his name is. So Mixon doesn't need to be as good as Cook to be close. But other than those 2, and Saquon Barkley, I think projection wise is in that range for me. I just never take him there because you usually don't need to. He usually goes 3 or 4 more picks, and you can usually get him in the second. So in practice, I end up taking Dalvin Cook, Joe Mixon, or one of the 3 receivers, CeeDee Lamb, Stephon Diggs, and Devontae Adams. That's pretty much how I play the last 4, 5 picks of the first round.
Yeah, Adams was going to be my target, especially in this format. If we were picking a little bit later, I would have taken him as probably as early as 9, which is actually where Stephon Diggs went to noted Bills fan Tim Schuler. So
Good pick.
fair enough.
I don't know how to
but
separate those guys. I just put them as like 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, because it's impossible, I think, to tell who's going to be the best of them.
Yeah, very, very tricky. I mean, it feels, we'll know that one of those guys ended up missing, but it feels like
I
at
bet
this
they're all
point.
going to be pretty. I mean, I think injury is the only thing that can stop any of those 3.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair summation there. One pick or one guy that you didn't mention in that range that did go pretty early, first round pick. I don't think I've seen him go this high, but again, best ball swinging for the fences a little bit. Deandre Swift went 7th overall in this one.
There was one underdog draft that I did like a month ago where someone took him like 2nd. I believe on NFFC he goes between like 10 and 14 usually. 7 is a little early. I get the appeal. I just think that the premises are wrong. I don't think there's like we were both I think among the people who were like, why the hell is everyone letting Deandre Swift fall to the 3rd round last year? Like last year, you had people being like, oh, you don't know that the new regime signed Jamal Williams, and you think DeAndre Swift is going to be a good 3rd round pick, do you? So like we were the people who said, yeah, he will. I don't think I don't think I can muster the courage though to say he's worth a 1st rounder this year. I get it. If he does play 17 games, or sorry, 17 games, then I guess I'm like, yeah, Swift probably raked then, because I certainly think he's good. The offensive line is maybe the best in the league. If he added a little mass that helps his durability, that'd be great. I don't know what to make of that person. It's not like DeAndre Swift was ever like out of shape. He was always really muscly and stuff. So I did see like the stuff about him adding some upper body weight. I would prefer lower body weight, honestly, but whatever. I don't. As long as he didn't like gain so much weight that he's hurting his ligaments in his legs, uh, it shouldn't really matter either way. But I can't buy in the idea that like 5 more pounds of bicep mass is going to make him more durable or anything. So if I think he's capped at a certain usage rate, then I don't think he can reach a good return at this price, because the way Austin Eckler makes it work as a 12 carry, 5 catch guy is by playing in a Chargers offense that gives him 20 touchdowns from scrimmage in 15 games. So if the Lions offense scores that many points, then maybe the same result is possible. But I, for some reason, just don't think it is. I just can't imagine Jared Goff scoring quite as many points as Justin Herbert.
Well, going back to Swift for a second, perhaps the addition of 5 pounds to his biceps is just a nod to his former Georgia teammate, Elijah Holyfield, who famously had
and his
gigantic
dad.
Biceps.
Not
Yes.
not Holyfield's dad, but Deandre Swift's. That guy must be like some kind of like deadlift enthusiast or something.
Yeah, he's a hoss. I know, from Hard Knocks this year, which has been the best Hard Knocks I feel like I
Dan
can
Campbell.
remember. Dan Campbell is so fun, but there's a big segment on the second episode about Amon-Ra St. Brown's dad and lifting with them. But yeah, Swift's dad also big dude.
Man, how did they not? They should have had Amon-Ra's dad, John Brown, and the Deandre Swift dad should have just had to do some kind of like 225 bench press competition or something.
HBO, HBO's got a whole bunch of stuff going on, and they clearly missed a big opportunity there. But we'll keep it going here. Speaking of Swift, or one last thing on Swift, Julia does want to know, ETN or Swift, better best ball option?
Well, they go quite a bit apart. I think what would it be? It's like ETN tends to go around like the 3rd, 4th round turn, something like that, and Swift always goes around the 1st, 2nd round turn. So there's no need to take ETN where you would have to take Swift. Like you could just get both of them, but yeah, it's like you just got to decide: do I want to take the 1st round running back or the 3rd? Not necessarily 312 or 311. He doesn't necessarily fall that far, but if you can get ETN there, that's great. With Swift, you will always have like a 4-pick window to make the call, and you can't really get him any later. But I have them projected basically the same. I don't think anyone else on the planet does, but I'm much higher on ETN than most people, clearly.
Yes, and actually this pairs up nicely because I selected ETN in the early 3rd round of this draft. I took him 3.2, and it kind of goes with the ongoing quandary that I've had from picking from the 2 or 3 slot a lot this offseason, where it feels ungreat to go ahead and take like Mike Evans to me for some reason that early in the 3rd round, and I don't want to always.
Yeah, he's a little better on underdog because that half-point PPR turns to his advantage given the touchdown production.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So like I never fully sell myself on Evans at that stage of the draft, and like I'm not going to reach necessarily for Keenan Allen, even if he is better suited for PPR. Michael Pittman, I like Michael Pittman, but not
out
as a mid 3rd. Yeah, that just seems like a bit much. Mike Williams, I think I consider. And then, DJ Moore is someone that I want to get more shares of, but he ideally to me is like a early 4th round guy as opposed to someone that you're taking in the early 3rd. So in the interest of just not getting another Kyle Pitts or Mark Andrews share, I think I'm kind of maxed out there. I went with ETN. I do feel good about it. And, that there's a risk there because we've talked about throughout the course of our like draft podcasts, our respective tight end strategy. And it's a lot of Pitts or a lot of waiting. So that kind of steered me towards hitting a more mid-tier option. Or Kittle's not a mid-tier guy necessarily, but I ended up getting a share of him in redraft. I only have a dynasty share, or only did have a dynasty share until this one. So I took George Kittle in the 5th round. That did kind of necessitate taking his 2nd tight end a little bit earlier than I normally would, just because of the injury insurance. But I do feel like Kittle in the 5th made some sense. Where are you on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I love Kittle. I do worry a little tiny bit in PPR just because I think he might have a weird season where he has a career low in targets and catches, but a career high in touchdowns. So I kind of view almost Kittle as like the Mike Evans at tight end this year, where in half point PPR, I think he gains ground on Waller really quickly. But I worry about PPR Kittle having something like 20 fewer catches than Waller, even if he stays healthy. So I'm not drawn toward him as much as Waller, but I do think in your position of, like you said, already having substantial Andrews and Pitts exposure, it makes sense to get something on Kittle or Waller because I never, as a Pitts super fan, as someone who takes Pitts like a third of the time or more, I never wanted to fade Waller and Kittle exactly. It's just more of a thing like it sucks so much when I don't get any of those guys, and I don't. It doesn't always suck. I mean, I am high on Albert Okwuegbunam. I think even if Nathaniel Hackett is a moron, I don't know if he can screw this up, and I absolutely think Hackett's a moron. But it sucks so much when you don't get one of Pitts or Kittle or Waller, and it's really easy to be sitting there in that third round, wherever it is in the third round, pass on Pitts, get to your fourth rounder. It's like, okay, well, it's a little too early now still to take one of the Kittle or Waller tight ends. So you get to the fifth round, you try to take it into the fifth, and it's really easy to lose both of them in the time in between. So I just know from specific memory that I have had best ball drafts where I was like, oh, I can't take Pitts again, and then I take whoever I do there, and I end up with I end up going Albert Okwuegbunam again because I can't quite land the Kittle or Waller spot even though I want to. It's like I plan on it and I specifically target them, and it just doesn't quite line up. So it's like it's one of those things like I am not nearly so much higher on Pitts than Waller and Kittle as my ownership percentage would my exposure percentages would say, but that's more because it's like I'm not so much picking Pitts over them that emphatically as much as I'm just so loath to end up with none of them, which is really easy to do if you take it into the fifth. But in any case, I like the Kittle pick, and I think I think he could have a career high in touchdowns because I think Lance is going to make it really tough to defend Kittle. I mean, I know the defense is still going to have to care about Kittle and Debo, and they're never going to not pay attention to them. But the kind of rush threats that Lance poses, it's um, I don't know. It's like you're just as a defense going to have to let them have some plays. Like you're going to have to guess at the point of attack, at the point of like the play development, one way or the other, and just pray that you're right. Because otherwise, you leave yourself open to both of them, and that obviously won't work either. But you can't spread yourself enough, thick enough, to account truly for everything. And I could see Kittle. I don't know. Like if he gets to 80 catches, I love his chances for like 12 touchdowns because basically I think Lance is going to decrease the target volume for everybody, but he'll get them into scoring position more reliably than Garoppolo did. And Kittle, being arguably the best threat from scrimmage, he could be the guy who capitalizes if that happens.
Yeah, I think so too. So I didn't want to wait much longer on tight end. It was between him and Waller, and obviously really good case for Waller, especially in PPR, but still went the Kittle route and feel good about it. And then in the sixth, this one that maybe I'm buying the helium. Maybe that this ends up being a fish pick or a fish brained pick, but even with two running backs already through 5 rounds, we went ahead and pulled the pin on one Damien Pierce. So as a late 6th round target, thoughts there?
Well, I wouldn't have taken him over Josh Jacobs, but I definitely like Pierce, and I don't think he goes much later than that at this point. So I don't think it was like, in terms of the current market, I don't think it's like a reach by much, if at all.
Right.
So it was one of those things like if you wanted him, it was that point that you pretty much had to make the call. So those situations are what they are. I so like in my position, not saying the obvious, I probably would have tried to like wait a little bit and just take Rashad Penny, Antonio Gibson, or Cordarrelle Patterson. But if those guys are not good this year, then Pierce would basically be the pivot that I would have wished I had made. And I'm still a little worried about Rex Burkhead taking pretty much all the passing down stuff. I think Pierce is a good enough player from scrimmage that the Texans could do a thing anyway where Burkhead's basically the passing down guy, but a couple times a game, maybe they put Pierce out there in a what might look like a run heavy look, and they set up some kind of like misdirection screen pass to get him the ball in space without making him meet the certain. Normally to run the kind of like base function routes that Burkhead does, you have to convince the coaches that you will basically never screw up in blitz pickup. But there might be a way for the Texans to get Pierce some targets, manufactured targets, basically, where they can get him on the field for the target without making him prove himself as a pass blocker. But if he does at some point prove himself as a pass blocker, then yeah, he could be, a 40, 45 snap player. And if he reaches that threshold, we don't really even care which team he plays for. So the Texans being a bad offense, it's only so much of a point to make if Pierce reaches a certain level of snaps per game.
No, exactly. Like they will still generate yards. Like even if it's a ugly offense, that carries and yardage still need to be accrued.
And I like
and
Pierce. I think his
accumulated.
talent from scrimmage is pretty clear. It's like the only question I have is like how much can he take before he starts to burn himself out? Like he might hit that rookie wall. His highest touch from scrimmage count I think was 129 in college. So if the Texans are going to work him like they're kind of indicating they might, he could get to that point in like I don't know, like 7 weeks or something. Whereas he's never gone over that point in 12 or more games in college.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So a bit of a limited sample as far as like him being a true workhorse is concerned. So we really just don't know one way or the other if he's going to be able to
He can
handle that.
play a
But
certain amount, and we're about to find out how much.
exactly. And at that point of the draft, it was basically the other. So I'm picking second, right? So the person on the wheel only had one running back at that point. So I figured if I let Pierce go at that stage, I wouldn't get him back 3 picks later because I just figured, and maybe incorrectly, maybe not, that the team picking first would have scooped Pierce. So it was either take
They
Joe
were a
Burrow.
threat for sure. I mean, they took running backs with 2 of their next 3 picks. So.
Yeah. So I think, theoretically, I might have read that one correctly, but it was either take Joe Burrow and end up with a Josh Jacobs or CEH, or take Damien Pierce, wait a little bit and grab quarterback later. And that's the route that I ended up choosing. So after Pierce, grabbed Hunter Renfrow. And then as some durability insurance to Kittle, I went ahead and got Dawson Knox. I know we've maligned Knox plenty of times on this pod, and 8th round is probably, it is fair as far as like where his ADP goes. But I saw the cliff coming as far as the other tight ends available were concerned, with Hawkinson already being off the board. So it was going to be either Knox, Ertz with those reports yesterday that kind of moved me off of him, or Freiermuth, and I'm not taking Freiermuth over Knox necessarily. So I wanted to lock that in and feel decent about my tight end too, despite investing, a 5th round pick in my first one in Kittle.
Yeah, I guess Knox at that point. I mean, I don't know. I'm lower on Knox than most people, and higher, I don't know, Quagbenham and David Njoku than most people. So I prefer those guys. I would say Knox has his like unique function, unique utility is that he's a touchdown threat because he's a big athletic guy playing a lot of snaps in an offense where we have a quarterback who's throwing 35, 40 touchdowns or whatever. So that 9 touchdowns on 50 catches or whatever he had last year is at once repeatable, but also, as far as repeatable probabilities go, still relatively fragile. Like
Sure.
he could catch 20 touchdowns in the next 3 years and only catch 3 this year. So just because of the way the ball bounces sometimes. So I'm not as high on Knox in this format as in standard scoring or half point PPR, because I feel like he is more of a touchdown guy than a catch one. And in full point PPR and in best ball tens, like sometimes you can get sometimes the best easy production that you get is just finding mediocre players who get a bunch of targets. And I think a player like Cole Kmet would come to mind as far as that goes in this format. Like I would probably wait on him like 2 rounds later, or like I said, I obviously go a lot of Okwegbenham and Njoku I think is being overlooked. But if as far as the touchdown probability between any of those guys, it's probably Knox who would have the highest over under.
So I just felt like, in the case of Knox, within the framework of this team, I'm only counting on Knox, 3-4 times this entire season,
Yeah,
if that, with Kittle taking over, most of my tight end scoring, save for his bye week. But I was just kind of assuming that there's probably going to be a time this season where Kittle misses a little bit. Just he plays like he's in a mosh pit, so he's going to get banged up at some point. And Knox, it felt like his role is very secure. Bills score a lot of touchdowns. Maybe it just lines up to where I have to use him on weeks where he does
it'd
end
be
up
really
finding the
great
end zone.
if he could have like a multi-touchdown game when Kittle, when Trey on the games where Trey Lance throws 15 passes or where Kittle, gets hurt or whatever.
That's when I'll do the A team meme where I just light a cigar and it's like that. I love it when a plan comes together.
Yeah,
It'll be
and
good.
the 49ers might have a couple things like that, where not a Mac Jones in Buffalo game, but they might have one where it's just kind of like, wow, we threw 10 passes and somehow we have 40 points. What happened? Yeah.
Oh man, never forget that Buffalo New England game. That was something to behold. And then rounding it out, took Aaron Rodgers as my quarterback one. I think Derek Carr would have made some sense as well, given that I already had Hunter Renfrow. But Rodgers, I think where he went was a fine enough pick. And I'm a little bit scared of Stafford this year, just with the elbow and the overall injury concern that he's shown over the years.
Yeah, I would probably have taken Carr, but I would be surprised if that question, the Rodgers versus Carr question, were the basis of you either cashing or failing. That would be a long shot, I think.
Yeah, I believe so as well. Anything else on your mind from this week before next week, where we're introducing week one of the NFL season, looking at that Bills-Rams game to get us started on that Thursday night?
Oh yeah, I mean, I guess as I do every year, see a lot of people overreacting to preseason, and I would encourage them to try to remember what things they believed, 6 weeks ago, and then compare them to what they believe now, and see if they can really justify the distinction, and see if they can really specifically remember why they changed their minds. Because I think a lot of people would be surprised to see how often they can't really seem to remember what it was that they thought changed. So I see stuff like George Pickens going way ahead of Chase Claypool and stuff like that. And I love Pickens, but you really should just make your projections before training camp and preseason and alter them on the basis of solid role changes. It's like if I project or just injuries that have clearly happened. It's like if I projected Tim Patrick to have certain something, then I got to put those numbers on those other guys. But I'm not gonna invert my understanding of the Pittsburgh wide receiver rotation because George Pickens caught a touchdown in the second quarter of the second
He
preseason game or something. It's
also
just,
knocked a guy over run blocking.
and Pickens
So
is sick, and I mean we've been banging the drum. We can take this kind of license, I think, but yeah, the idea that at the very least, what I mean to say is, if someone believes Pickens is better than Claypool, they should have been able to convince themselves before they saw the highlight clips. Like, there's nothing George Pickens did in training camp or preseason that's more important than what he did at Georgia.
or different, really.
Right. In this case, it's no different, but there are some cases where it's like people, start to completely reconfigure their definitions of who these players are, and it's like Pickens should have been a first round pick, but even so, he's like 3 years younger than Claypool. He's no faster than Claypool, even though Claypool's 30 pounds heavier. Like that stuff, matters, and the quarterback sucks. So I can understand using Pickens as a basis to be off Claypool, but taking Pickens in like the eighth round, like I've been seeing, that's love the guy, but buy him after the dip next year when we're doing. There's going to be this thing next year where people are going to be like, "Oh, another George Pickens, because he only will have like 600 yards this year, and they thought he was going to be like a 1,200 yarder." It's like, you just got to learn to understand what matters and what doesn't. And preseason does not matter. Or maybe I'm remembering wrong, and Terrace Marshall had a huge rookie year, and Jamar Chase is a bust. I can't remember which way that one turned out. Some preseason scholar, remind me if you can.
Oh, that they certainly will. Very vocal and very humble about their mistakes based on preseason. But that's going to wrap things up for us here at the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Again, presented to you by our friends over at Dynasty Owner. For Mario Puig, I'm John McKechnie. Thanks for listening. And next week, we'll catch you week 1. We're almost there.
Try RotoWire today, free for 10 days. Get our premium tools, rankings, analysis, and breaking news alerts. No credit card required. Go to rotowire.com/